Boom! And we are live with another episode of the Brownwater Banter podcast. My name is Jared Seymour.
My name is Joey Cates.
It is. And in the studio, man, the gentleman who just won't learn. He keeps coming back to be grilled over and over again.
Glutton for punishment.
Trevor from the DMR, Mississippi Department of Marine Resources. We're going to be talking about fisheries management as a global topic. But, of course, we will have to get into snapper and snapper season and catch limits and weights and all kind of other stuff that y'all want to hear about. So, but before we do that, before we jump into the conversation, we're going to thank the people that, you know what I'm going to say, keep the lights on for us over here at the Brownwater Studio. Right out of the gate, Dr. Robbie Williams over at Southern Magnolia Smiles, man. If you're looking for a great local dentist, he is located on Washington Avenue in Ocean Springs. Look him up on the socials at Southern Magnolia Smiles on Facebook and Instagram. 2025 is the year to brush your teeth. So when you're ready to book that consultation, you can give him a shout at 228-215-1202 and tell him Brownwater sent you. Taylor and Cox Law Firm. If you or yourself or someone you know needs legal representation, Taylor and Cox Law Firm is the one for you. They practice in Jackson County, George County, and Greene County. They've been on the coast for over 30 years. They specialize in felonies, misdemeanors, DUI, family law, divorce, child custody, you name it. Tyler right there is ready to fight tooth and nail for you. You've probably seen his beautiful face.
He's all over,
spackled all over every
billboard,
he's going for the Shannara and the what is it, Morris Bart's of the world, and I couldn't be more proud of him. If you're ready to book that consultation with him, you can give him a shout at 228-696-0111 and tell him that Brownwater sent you. If you're trying to get that beach bod going, you're probably a little bit late for this summer, but it's not too late to give up. Forever Young Men and Women's Health can get you right back on track, feeling better, moving around, getting off the couch. Their motto is bringing medicine, health, and exercise together to help men and women live their best lives. This is Kendrick right here. He's they're on Facebook as well. Look them up. Look at some of the videos, some of the testimonials, some of the information he's putting out there. It's a lot of cool stuff. He really knows what he's doing. He's the pro. Let him help you. Book a consultation. He'll draw some lab work on you. He'll try to figure out what you're deficient in, vitamins, hormones. They specialize in testosterone replacement. You can give him a shout at 228-363-6623 and tell him Brownwater sent you. And that does it, Joey. I know I smoked you on that one.
I'm not even close.
It's not even close.
Keep on rolling.
Trevor, brother, thank you for being back here in the studio. We got a lot to talk about. Fifth time on the show? Fourth?
Got to be 4 or 5.
Still one hand.
Yeah, it's still one hand. That's all right.
hand.
We're working on that. We're going to get that fixed. We'll get you to the double digits before we know it. Where do we start? Like we talked about, fisheries management is going to be the big topic, but you know people right now that are tuned in, they want to know about snapper. We said a little bit before we went live, this is the first year, Joey, and probably how long that they had good weather for the entire first week?
It's since I've been old enough to drive a boat.
That's right. That's right.
First 2 weeks, the weekend was slick as a baby's butt, 1 and 2s all weekend, 1 or 2 or less. And then all of a sudden, that never happens. It's almost like a cobia tournament. You know it's going to be bad weather. Opening day of snapper season is going to be bad weather. And all of a sudden, God said,
one time. Have y'all seen the repercussions of that on your end so far?
Yeah. So obviously we opened up the 23rd and basically Friday, Saturday, Sunday we're just
hammering it, right? Hammering it.
And the fish were out there and they were ready to eat. So we ended up south of 30, which is right around where we typically have been, not in the last couple of years, but like last 8 years, it's right there in line.
Okay.
So we had a fair amount of participation. Luckily, our quota this year is 82,342 pounds. I know that because I went and looked it up in the federal amendment where it says 82,342 in a single table in an 80-page document, and then got confirmation from one other person that that's the number.
Okay.
We've been waiting on the official letter for this year. Typically, we get a letter from NOAA stating what our exact poundage is. But this year with the increase from what we had last year to now, it's 82,342. That's the number.
That's the goal, people. That's the target.
Yeah. So that gives us a little bit more cushion for this year at least. And they did hit them hard the first 2 weeks. We had good weather for I think Friday and Saturday of the second weekend. Yeah. And then it's kind of played out since then. We've had a lot of bad weather, rough weekend this weekend.
A little bit of wind, I think, is what it was, right? Yeah. It's been good weather, just the wind.
And then this weekend's not looking too great. Saturday's kind of out. So we'll end up being right in the zone of where we typically are. Okay. And that's kind of way it usually balances out. We have a low first weekend participation because of weather. Usually it bounces back and hits hard second weekend. So
everybody's chomping at the bit to get out there.
Absolutely.
As soon as they announce them dates and people are ready to go.
Yep.
Yeah. Let's do it real quick. I know we joked around. You've been on here a few times. You always get the snapper topic. But for people that maybe are catching you on here for the first time, I still get these questions from people that I work with, people that I see at the dock, people that we talk to at fishing tournaments. Mm-hmm. Let's give them the 1 minute elevator speech, bullet point, as condensed as we can about what it takes to go snapper fishing and be legal. I'm talking permitting. You know where I'm going with this.
Yeah. So this year is very similar to last year. So first and foremost, right, tails and scales mandatory reporting is still required for every trip. That's one person on the vessel that has to report. It's been the same way since 2017, really, and when we talk about being an enforceable program. Alongside that, the first topic I came on here to talk about, the recreational offshore landing permit. That's one that's also required this year. You can get that for free on our website. That is, every person on the boat has to have that unless you fall into the categories where you're exempt, similar to a recreational fishing license. Those are under 16 and 100% disabled.
Okay.
Those just went out 2 weeks ago, right? The physical cards.
Yeah, we got the physical cards out right before snapper season. We finally found a vendor to be able to print them and do them,
Very relatively. Yep.
So those are the two main things this year, and they're coinciding with one another. You're also going to see a heavier presence of us at the dock. So a lot of my staff, they're about ready to, commit mutiny at this point. It's every weekend, 5 surveys a weekend, because we're doing both the federal program, MRIP, which I talked about on this show, alongside MS Krill, the direction that we're trying to go in for recreational estimates. So that's just leading to a lot of surveys, a lot of presence, a lot of us being down there and asking questions. So try to be as nice as you can. When you run across them, they're just there to try to get some answers and try to produce recreational estimates. They're just doing their best.
No, let's recap real quick though, just so you said it, but I want to make sure everybody heard you. You got to have a fishing license first. That's number one. And you said that. No, you did say that. You did say that, but I want to make sure it's like apparent. Fishing license first. Then you have to log your trip through Tails and Scales, which is online, or the easiest way to do it is go to the Brownwater Banter app, download that's free in the App Store and Google Play. It's right inside of there. You can literally click on one thing and go straight there.
And it's usually the captain or whoever owns the boat that does that, because it has to be registered to the boat.
That's correct. That's a one-person thing for the vessel, like you said. And then the recreational offshore landing permit, everybody on the boat has to have it. It is free still, right? It's free.
And there's no reporting associated with that one per trip or anything.
Yeah, you just have it.
You're going to get randomly called during the fishing effort survey that we got going on, and you answer the phone, and it's going to look like it's either spam or somebody you don't recognize.
Yeah, y'all did get a 228 number, I do believe. But does it change every time? Do you know the answer to that, or does that number stay consistent?
It shouldn't change. It should be consistent.
Okay.
And the next thing to work on is trying to figure out how to make that say MS Krill or DMR fishing,
because y'all guarantee your percentages of telephone answers are going to go through the roof. If I know it's y'all, I will pick up the phone, but sometimes it doesn't come across that way. So, but anyway, so that should cover us on the snapper.
Yeah. And ROLP, ROL.
I know. That's why I just said it.
If you don't have it, it's pretty instant, right? You can get online.
You get an email.
You get an email, and that works for you being legal. As long as you have the number on it.
And credit to, my staff as well, right? We've got the call center, the call line that you call. That used to go out to an outside entity, and then we ended that one because the customer service just wasn't up to what we would like. People were on the phone too long. They were being too complicated. We finally routed those directly to staff. The main one is going to pick up is Eric Geely. He was on here for one of them. Then it'll get to Josh or Meg, or sometimes we even make its way to me at times. So
we get the head guy. You down the rabbit hole. If you get the head guy on there.
If you can't get the ROLP, if you can't make a trip, if you have general questions or anything else like that, that's the line you go to, and we will get you on the water no matter what.
Okay.
That's always the plan. I mean, we've answered the phone at, early on, 4:00 in the morning sometimes. Other times now it's more like it's usually in business hours. Sometimes it's 7, 8 p.m. But they will answer the phone.
As long as you're at the dock and you know about it then, I guess if you can do it online. There's really no reason, unless you're just not very savvy on the internet, which, I guess there are a few people
4 or 5 minutes to do the whole thing.
And bang, you're out there and you're fishing. So it's not like, don't let it intimidate you. But I guess if they had to call you, they could.
Yeah. If there's any problems, right? If they get on there and they can't make a trip. We solve that problem real quick and can show you how to do it from there on out.
And so you mentioned your guys being at the dock. Y'all are showing force there, trying to get the numbers. Mainly, it's all scientific, like collection of data.
That's
why I'm kind of backpedaling as I said that. But y'all are there, and then also I know last season, Joey, that was last season when we went. They had, was that Harrison County Sheriff's Department or was that just the law enforcement side?
No, that was
DMR.
Ocean Springs. We came back in Ocean Springs, so it would have been Jackson County, but I don't think it was. I think it was one of y'all's
female officers.
Yeah.
All right.
Bulletproof vests. You had the little thing. She was checking. She was making sure. She wasn't looking at the fish. I mean, she opened it up and was like, they're going to get you with the fish. I want to make sure everything's legal. You're not drinking. Yeah. You got all your life jackets. You got stuff like that.
She did look at the snapper.
Yeah.
She didn't measure them.
Yeah.
I think she counted just to make sure we didn't have more numbers than we should have had, which were under by 2, unfortunately.
We're not going to get on that story.
Well, I was thinking about sharing it, because we were legal. We did everything legal.
Go ahead.
So I'll share this little story. Embarrassing for me.
Not for me.
For you too. You're the captain, or you are a captain. All right, captain. Anyway, long story short, we go on a snapper trip and we get out there to realize that we don't have anything to measure the fish with. And so we have
we?
Yeah, you too.
So this is what happened. Jared said, bring what we need. So I'm
no. You already said it wrong.
Oh, go ahead.
I said, what do we need to go fishing tomorrow? And Joey says, don't worry about it. I got it.
Thinking pole wise, tackle wise, stuff like that.
He's a captain, right? He's a charter boat captain.
Yeah.
Right. Get all the way out there, realize none of our normally you bring like a cooler and it's got the tape on top of that, right? And I didn't have anything in my tackle box, nothing. We had nothing to measure fish with. We get all the way out there and we start catching snapper. So we're sitting there, we're like, what do we do? Like, this is a bad problem to have, right? So we're going through all this stuff, looking for any kind of tape, any type of measuring device, whatever we got. And he opens up a first aid kit. His med kit has 3-inch by 3-inch squares gauze in case you get cut. So we take a rope, 3-inch, hold it, another 3-inch, hold it, and we map it all the way out to 16. But I purposefully
left some,
made it to where I was like, I'm not gonna cut it close. Like, we're gonna make sure that these things are legal. So we're using that all day long. And like I said, I think we were 2 under our limit because we couldn't. We didn't catch them, but we had some nice ones, a few nice ones. And sure as shit, we get back to the dock, and they're all sitting there waiting at Ocean Springs Marina. And I look at Joey, and I'm like, dear God, I hope we calculated this right. I said, because the brownwater dude showing up with 5 or whatever number we had, illegal snapper, it's not going to be a good look for us, for the brand, for the podcast, for anything.
Mug shots.
And I was sweating it, dude. Yeah. And they all measured out fine.
Oh, they were way over.
They were way over. Yeah, because I was not taking any chances. Yeah. But they took the bones. They collected the bones for the ear bone or whatever it is. And it was an overall pleasurable experience other than us not having the gear that we should have.
Well, it all worked out.
It all worked out. And it's great for a great story. So I appreciate the story.
And you probably won't forget the measuring.
Never again
for a while.
Never again.
Probably like 4 or 5 years once it lapses.
Right. Or the next trip. I don't know. But anyway, so your guys are out there. They're doing their job.
Yeah,
they were very
great
friendly.
job.
They're very friendly. So kudos.
And it wasn't. It was quick. I mean,
it was.
Literally cut through 5 or 6 fish in 10 minutes, and we were back on the boat going home.
Yeah, and that's so the one thing we did with MS Grill versus MRIP, right? MS Grill is a very simplified survey form, dockside, especially. So they're getting through those surveys like that, which then gives them more time to put hands on fish, measure if they've got the time, or to get to the next boat coming in. Because as y'all know, if a storm's coming through or if anything pushing people off the water, usually they come in droves.
Get out quick.
Yeah, so it allows them to be able to get to every boat possible, and we don't have to make as many assumptions about who's catching what or who we're missing or anything else like that, which is a good thing.
Yeah, and I'm not going to say any names or any context here, but I did speak with somebody who went and did a snapper trip, and they forgot to log the trip on Tails and Scales, got back to the dock, got their fish confiscated,
got them,
and got the ticket, and it was an honest mistake on their part. They had done everything else they thought. I think they even had the ROLP licenses for everybody, just forgot to log the trip. And I was like, I told them, like, man, you just can't.
Yeah,
I understand, honest mistake, like it happens, but you cannot do that.
Yeah. There's pretty well zero tolerance for it on the Marine Patrol side.
Yeah.
So
and they lost their fish and got a ticket.
And let's say if people forget, they get to the islands. If they do that, just they can call us. If there's not enough service to get on the app, call, we'll do everything we can.
So let me make sure I'm hearing you right. Like, that's a good point. I didn't think about this. Like, the question would be then, if you're out there, you've already caught the fish and you realize that you didn't register the trip, as long as you call you guys or get on, can I even do it through the app, through the online and be already have taken the trip? You see what I'm saying? As long as I do it before I get to the dock and y'all ask me about it.
Technically, by law, you're supposed to have it if you are harvesting
right
fish,
while
right?
you have it.
But if you've made the mistake and forgot,
got you.
Right, obviously try to do your best to be able to reconcile it before you get back through or into the islands. I know we're getting spotty service at 13, 1 and 2 now.
Right.
Every now and then, sometimes that's not enough to reach a server or get download an app. But if it's enough to make a call, make the call, and we'll do everything we can to try to rectify it.
So that's good to know.
Yeah, it's a backup plan. Yeah, it's a backup
mistakes
plan.
do happen.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah.
Loading the boat, getting bait, all of a sudden you forget. Oh, halfway out there,
measuring tape.
Yeah, measuring tape.
It happens.
Forget where you're going.
Yeah,
go to the wrong place.
Yeah,
stuff like that.
I mean, we're all human.
I got it.
We're all human.
Yeah, you might have made that mistake today. Who knows? Who knows? It happens.
So snapper season's going to run till what date, and then we're going to shut it off and do a recount.
July 6th is the date at the moment. That's what we put out. That's our plan. It's the typical distribution that we have is the Sunday after July 4th, and then we'll go back through and figure out if we have enough left. If we have enough left, typically we try to prioritize around Labor Day.
Right.
But we'll see where the rest of the weeks get us.
Well, that's a fair enough report there.
That's all.
I love it. All right, so we got the snapper thing. I hope answer some questions for people. There's an update more or less. Let me see if Ask Trevor. Okay, we'll take a question from Claire. Sibo wants to know. Here we go. He said, ask Trevor to explain cobia guidelines, state versus federal waters, 2 per person or 2 per boat. Can you? Should I screen that first? You good with that one?
Yeah, I'm good.
Okay.
So
man, right here, he's the man.
Yeah,
we had.
Well, the reason why this is because we always fish that the cobia tournament, and they go federal waters or they go to state. It's illegal to have so many in federal, but you can have in state. Blah blah blah, and that's what we get tied up on.
Yeah. So essentially, we talked about this a fair amount. It came up at the commission meeting. Clarence actually brought it. We had a discussion about it, provided all the information we had on it. But essentially, we went down the route. The Gulf Council changed the size limit on cobia to 36, which I think is it's perfectly good size, right?
I think everybody's for that.
Yeah, they were trying to go above that a little bit, and it's like then you turn it into like where it's not really a nettable fish, it's that kind of stuff. But either way, we had a length limit change on the fishery itself, and then right after that, due to increasing stakeholder concern, especially over in the eastern side of the Gulf, they implemented bag and vessel limit in federal waters: 1 fish per person, 2 fish per vessel. Now, when we provided the information to the commission and kind of showed what we've got and what we've been observing, as well as, showing the disparity in, what our anglers can access at times versus what other states can access in terms of federal species, we elected not to make the change to the bag limit. We still had the length limit at 36 inches, but we kept the bag limit at 2 fish per person to try to provide our anglers that opportunity, right, within 3 miles, because that's the territorial waters for cobia. It's not 9 miles. That's for reef fish. 3 miles and in is going to be territorial waters for cobia. And so when they push in close to the islands, when they're on the Gulfport ship channel in the fall, stuff like that, provide that opportunity. So if folks do go out there and they catch 3 fish, they'll be able to keep them participate in a fishery that, they don't readily get access to all the time, because our guys have trouble accessing amberjack. They have trouble access
triggers
issues, accessing triggerfish, grouper, stuff like that. We're kind of a single species fishery, so providing that opportunity to the anglers was a priority to us, and it seemed like, from what we were seeing, it wasn't going to be too detrimental with basically the amount of participation we have.
Okay,
so that's it. So, within 3 miles,
go ahead.
Yeah, within 3 miles, it's 2 fish per person. You get beyond 3 miles, it's 1 fish per person, 2 fish per vessel. 36 inches is the limit no matter what. You do not catch over that limit. Don't catch your 2 per person to go out to federal waters. That's a problem.
Yeah.
Catch them in federal waters, come back through.
And I think that's where Sibo is talking, because on that tournament, you're dicey. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
You got to figure out where you want to go. If I stop at the farewell buoy and I hit 2 winds there, do I go offshore and I can't bring them offshore? If I get 2 offshore, I can't bring them back in.
Because that's what you're saying, right? If you get the 2 per person limit on your boat, now you cannot go into federal waters, because if you get caught with them out there, you're illegal.
Right.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Yep. That's a lot. We need to make an infographic or something. Y'all have that on your website? Do you know, like broken down like that? Like per fish, with just what we just talked about?
That'd probably be a good one to add. I know we've got it in the length of bag limits and all that stuff for our state, but I'm thinking
really, like a picture.
My daughter's great on Canva. I'll get her.
Yeah. For real. Yeah, throw them out there. That'd be good to know.
But that's definitely what he's talking about is the cobia tournament, because you're going from federal waters to state waters, and it's a different possession of fish.
Yep.
Okay. All right. So that was thank you, Sibo, for the question. What about now fisheries management as a whole? What did you want to break down for us?
All right.
Bring this to info.
He's got his dry erase
scores.
I've got stuff today.
Okay.
Oftentimes in the last couple of times I've been on here, we talk about where we've been for the last 7 or 8 years. We talk about, calibration between the surveys, what got us to red snapper to where they are, but we never really we haven't touched too much beyond that. And so my hope is that we just have a brief conversation, kind of where we started, as a country in conservation, and then where we got to in fisheries, especially marine fisheries, essentially since that same time period. And I'm going to provide what I think my vision is for where we should go from here.
Okay.
I don't know if a lot of people will agree with it, but I'm going to provide what my opinion is.
Oh, we value your opinion.
Yeah. He's not scared of getting in the hot seat. Man. Let's do it.
All right. So first thing.
He's got notes and everything.
Yeah, he's got shit labeled.
I like
too.
that.
I love it. Here we go.
Yeah, that's summarized work.
Right.
So in the early 1800s, we obviously went through an era of exploitation. It could be called, right? We mowed down, we took down as many trees as we could to have as much lumber as we could. We turned all into farmland. We did as much as we could to bend the land to our will, to provide resources, everything else. We hunted what we could. Mm-hmm. We destroyed what we could.
Killed all the buffalo.
We talked about it.
Killed the buffalo. Yep. The other one is the passenger pigeon. That's the one I like to point to. Like one of the most numerous game birds that we had, flocks for miles, millions of individuals. You can no longer find it on the earth. Hunted it to extinction. Habitat degradation.
It must have tasted good.
Yeah.
Tasted good, and they were harvesting squabs, the small ones out of the nest. So they're actually cutting down trees to get that because it was a delicacy over in France.
Oh, boy.
So habitat degradation, over harvest.
Yeah.
So they were both ends.
So that's your pinnacle species, right? You think buffalo, you think that.
Yeah.
And there's always, every time we got into this new era, new anything else, we always consider the resources as relatively unlimited. We got the new land, it's unlimited. We started exploiting freshwater species, they're unlimited. We got the marine species, they're unlimited. And every time we learned our lesson along the way as to what we could and could not do, it just so happened that marine lagged by about 80 years for most of the stuff.
I also think it's technologically based too, right? Like Absolutely. Back in the day,
we couldn't get to them.
If all you had was an axe, it's kind of hard to like mow the environment down. And then all of a sudden here comes chainsaws and industrial style harvesting of everything. You can do some damage, right? I think conservation has to play catch up a lot of times to technology,
same with the boat. I mean, most of it, rowboats, and all of a sudden we got
schooners versus
now we got Freemans that would quad 400, 450.
The document I brought here that last time, the old one, I mean, they detailed the old fleet. It used to be a sailing fleet that had just a water in the middle of it that they would just throw fish into. So what dictated the time of the trip was how long are those fish going to stay alive in this puddle of water that we're going to bring them back in.
Oh, wow.
And so then they switched to auxiliary power, started to be able to stretch out a little bit and stuff. And
then range was what on the sailing fleet was it 10, 20 miles at the most?
I don't know. But I love seeing those old schooner photos of like either fish or especially when they have the oyster harvest on them and the boats look like they're, how the gunnels go. Yeah, it's like, dang, they got her loaded down.
But that was maybe 10 or 12 people compared to thousands of people that we have now. You know what I'm saying?
You mean like fishing?
Yeah.
Probably more than 10 or 12 though, right?
They
had a decent fleet back then.
Yeah, it was fairly industrial and industrialized quick. I think, the first account, if I remember, this is stretching back 15 years in my mind.
Don't hold him to this.
The first account of like a beam trawl, I think, was a lawsuit of one of the fishermen saying that it was too effective or something else off of like Norway or something. I can't remember. I think that's what it was, but there's plenty of accounts, industrialization of the fleet, increase in technology allowed us to increase exploitation. Mm-hmm. It seems to the story mirrors itself throughout time.
Right.
Along the line, so about 1900, we started passing. That's what this is, just a list of conservation acts. It's just multiple things that were undertaken, starting really with Teddy Roosevelt that pioneered a lot of this conservation.
Yellowstone.
So
he was a big outdoorsman too, right?
Mm-hmm.
He's a big outdoorsman.
Pelican Island. So he really brought the theme of conservation. The Lacey Act really prohibited illegal trade of wildlife and really essentially ended market hunting across the country. You had the Migratory Bird Treaty Act, the Migratory Bird Hunting Stamp Act, which allowed for essentially funds to be able to be brought in for conservation.
Right.
Kind of expanded that. We went over the Pittman-Robertson Act the last time I was here, and the subsequent Dingell-Johnson Act, the excise tax that allows for us to be able to have sport fish restoration dollars to be able to put toward access for fishermen and to be able to conduct conservation projects and everything else across the board. Is probably the number one most successful program that we've got across the board. Endangered Species Act, which obviously has, its turmoil right now, along with the Marine Mammal Protection Act.
You say turmoil. What do you mean there?
Well, there's obviously some discussion at the national level as far as how far sometimes these things are taken. So the language itself doesn't change, but sometimes the interpretation or how it's implemented changes at the federal level, becoming more and more strict or more restrictive, or adding more and more regulations when the fundamental language of the rule itself hasn't changed. It's just that it's being implemented in a different way. So there was a meeting on it, I think at the congressional level, about, how it's being used currently to either stifle or potentially overly impact projects or other things
like sharks.
Well, and that makes me think about, and I'm going to butcher all of this, but help me walk through it. I think you're talking about the difference between what a law says and then what these agencies think that they can do as far as like trying to almost like legislate their own rules inside. Like it's based on some truth, but like we've added all this other shit to it. What were the fishermen up on the East Coast that sued for that and won in court, right?
Cod or something like that.
Well, I don't even remember the details. I just know that they pretty much said, hey, that ain't what the original law states. You don't have the authority legally to add shit to the law. And what you're trying to enforce now is fluff that was added, and they won.
Yeah. And sometimes it seems like we start flirting with the line of common sense.
Right.
A lot. Like we start doing things that just don't seem to be within the realm of what's logical, right? The Speed Act that they were trying to pass across the board, where, across the entire Gulf or Atlantic, you can only go a certain miles an hour in order to protect, endangered species and stuff like that.
Oh, yeah. Was it the whales?
Yes.
Yeah.
So like some of that stuff, like to me, and this is like, it's my opinion, right?
Right.
When it came, it should have been like, no
way.
Like,
this
that
makes
doesn't make
no
any
sense. Yeah.
There has to be a different way to do this.
Right.
But no, it was taken in all seriousness, and it was done in the bureaucratic way and within the rules and regulations as it's stated. And I just, to me, we start pushing these things a little bit too far sometimes, and that's what I'll go over
here. Okay.
All right, so that's the foundational wildlife stuff. I mean, it really took part 1900s through the 1960s, and then we had this era of environmentalism a little bit more, where we started doing Clean Water Act, Clean Air Act, stuff like that helped habitat, help the environment, stuff like that, and really got us on the right track. Now, the marine fishery side of things started to get exploited during that time period, right? So we started getting increases in technology, the ability to be able to track down these spots, motor a long ways, keep fish good for a while on ice, everything else like that. And really that's what, kind of led to what I think it was almost the alert in the 90s. So Atlantic cod. So I'll back up a little bit. So in the 1970s, the original Magnuson-Stevens Act, which is this thing right here. That's what I brought. Right,
good read.
Federal law.
Yeah.
Oh,
it's a good read. Yeah, there's no doubt.
A real page turner. So that the original was passed. And in summary, right, the first thing it did really was expel the foreign fleet from our waters, establish the EZ, and basically there was concern of the foreign fleet coming in and taking up too much of what should be considered the nation's product. Now, the only thing it really resulted in is that the foreign fleet was pushed out, but we just supplemented it with a domestic fleet.
Right.
So we continued harvesting.
Sounds right.
So that's how the first
sounds like some shit we would do. I like it.
And then I think between the 90s and 91, you had the Atlantic cod collapse, which essentially I think the biomass plummeted to 97% of its original. So it just completely crashed.
Yeah.
And this was a species that, once again, it was one of those things that was thought to be untouched. You couldn't catch enough
infinity.
And that's one of the reasons why I brought the whiteboard, is that there's a couple of reasons why Atlantic cod did what it did. And there's a couple of things that were learned that then led to additional, if it didn't inspire, it was at least a very large part of where we got to. So one was essentially what masked what was going on with cod is a hyperinflation of CPUE. So I'll explain that right here. So typically, straight line. This is sloppy riding like I'm in kindergarten.
That's fine.
That's okay.
Straight line. You would think that as abundance increases in a population, that the CPUE would correspondingly increase as well.
What does
what does that stand for?
Catch per unit effort.
There you go.
The performance of the fishery.
Okay. Right.
So if there's more out there,
it's easier to
probably
catch.
Be catching more with the same amount of effort. What happened with cod is that it showed hyperstability. So it followed this top line here. So that even as abundance decreased, you still saw this consistent measure of CPUE. And that was because over time, the stock was doing this. So the first one, once again, looks like a target. But the
when
first
you hold it
one,
like that, it's perfect.
Yeah.
The first one was the original stock.
Okay.
Right? The boundaries of it. And then over time, as they fished it down, the stock became more and more concentrated in a smaller and smaller area.
So it got easier to catch them.
And the fishery knew where they were and knew how to track them down. So the CPUE remained stable because they weren't fishing in the old area where they weren't. They continued fishing where they were until they got to a point where they were so localized that they continued catching at the same level until it just crashed out.
Is that something unique to that species that allowed for that to happen, or do lots of species?
I think there's a lot of species that could exhibit hyperstability, but that one's to me the quintessential one because it had such a large scale gear and targeted expansion, and you saw it was well documented the shrink in the range over time, and so that's the one that really sent up red flags that the original passing of Magnuson might not have done everything it was supposed to.
Okay, can we stop right here for a second?
Absolutely.
I want to get in the weeds on that a little bit. So in other words, that metric that they were using, what did you call it over there? Catch per
unit effort.
Yeah, that catch per unit effort versus abundance. That's a framework to look at something, correct? Did they know on purpose that was not the right way to do it? Did they figure that out over time?
I think they figured it out
over time. Okay.
So I'm sure there were some warning signs, right? People weren't catching fish where they were, all that kind of stuff. But the harvest continued despite that. And CPUE typically is used as a relative measure of abundance sometimes, right? So if you're catching the fish and you're catching them consistently, then it seems like everything's okay. But unless you've got other information to help supplement, right?
Correct.
So let's say
the old grounds where nobody's going anymore.
Like the fishery independent stuff, right? If they were conducting the fishery independent survey across the board and noticed they weren't catching them in 3/4 of the range that they were catching them in,
that would have been a red flag alert.
Right. So then the management side has to respond to that. And to me, I don't think the framework was in place on the regulatory side for them to do that effectively, which is why I think we saw continued changes and iterations of Magnuson.
Okay. And that just goes to show you though how
as long as everybody's catching, it's good. It's good.
Right.
It's good.
It's not a super simple, straightforward answer to that. And you look at it like, you hear anecdotally like, well, we went to this wreck. And I'm overlaying like what we hear about and see compared to this particular instance. But it's like, we see them all the time. They're out there all the time. And it's like, well, they may be, right, but they may be shrinking down into a smaller area, or there's just so many factors, I guess. I'm trying to say.
There are. We'll cover a little bit of it because I'm going to try to take what I'm going to get to and then plug it into our current situation.
Let's go.
Yeah.
So that led to essentially the Sustainable Fisheries Act. That was 1996, which essentially, reduced bycatch of certain species, rebuilt overfish stocks, established essential fish habitat, and then created, defined overfishing thresholds and everything else for a fishery. So really got it on the track of, all right, we're going to, figure out how to make these councils operate. We're going to figure out how to rebuild populations that we over harvested, and we're going to do it in more of a framework style approach to be able to make sure that we respond when we're supposed to respond. And if we didn't respond in time or something happened, we take the measures to make sure we get back there.
Right.
Now, there was another one right after that, and this is the one I'd like to say I have issues with it, but I'll try to explain why I have issues with it.
Okay.
So the next one established annual catch limits. So that's just the next iteration. That was reauthorization in 2006. So for the most part across the nation, most stocks are largely commercial. Think about our largest fisheries across the board, the fisheries of Alaska, the fisheries of the Northeast. Most of those are largely commercial. They're not high recreational, anything else like that. But the mandate from the reauthorization was that ACLs had to be established for all managed stocks by the year 2011. And the catch limits must be based on best available science and identified by the science and statistical committees, right?
ACL,
So
what's ACL?
Annual catch limit.
Okay.
Right. So this gave more authority to the SSC, right? The scientific side, the science and statistical committee that advises the council. It allowed them to have the power to be able to say, all right, we've got a quantitative product that has come out in the form of a stock assessment. We need to determine what a OFL, an overfishing limit, and an ABC, allowable biological catch for the species, right? So that's this is the max we can sustain. And then we take down from that what's in the realm, and then we establish ACLs per sector. So the council's involvement is that the SSC assigns OFL, ABC, and then the councils then determine how much uncertainty or risk they're willing to take on with the ACLs. They can match that ABC, or they can cut them down a little bit just in case they don't want to harvest too much. Now, for commercial fisheries, ACLs.
Let's stop right there.
Okay.
Scientific committee determines a number, allowable total catch. I messed that up.
From an assessment or best scientific information available,
okay,
which is typically in the form of an age structured assessment.
Science committee comes up with this number, and then the Gulf Council, am I hearing you right, can then decide, yes, we want to go with that number, or we think we should scale it back a little bit.
Right.
Okay. Why would the Gulf Council scale it back a little bit? What is the
fluff? Give it a danger zone?
Well, but I'm saying, what is the repercussions? Let me make up numbers. If what'd you say earlier? We're at what, snapper 80 something thousand, 83,000 pounds.
Let's work in the order of millions, because that's where we're at with a lot of these.
Okay, let's say 1 million.
Yeah, let's say
the
an
scientific
ABC
committee
for
comes
$1 million.
1 million, right? Then the Gulf Council is going to look at that and say, why not just say, you said 1 million, cool, 1 million, let's go. What is the repercussion on them for? Why would they back it off?
So sometimes that happens, right, where the ACLs basically add up to the ABC, but there is a lot of times where there's some uncertainty around what the stock can produce or what they've observed in the past. So if you've got uncertainty in landings, or some shift in effort over time, or something that gives you a signal that potentially if we harvest at this level, we may be pushing a little bit too far, that's when they would scale back and provide a buffer.
Yeah.
Because if they went over that 1 million, let's just say, they would be held responsible. There would be some kind of penalty for that. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, there could be overages, or there could be, detrimental effects to the stock directly.
Okay.
Right. In the sense of not just a management action, but it could also be where the stock actually begins to suffer.
Decline,
okay.
Right.
So the
Even
actual
with the
biological effects of what could happen.
And so let's see. So one of the best examples, I guess, is, would be the Peruvian anchovy off of South America. So you set a catch limit at MSY, right? Maximum sustainable yield, right? And their intent was that they would harvest that over time. The problem with that fishery is that it was subject to environmental stochasticity, which is a fancy word to say there weren't always as many fish as they thought they were.
Right.
Because between El Nino and La Nina, you had these massive fluctuations in population levels. So in order to account for that, which they didn't, they kept it stable. And so when you had a bad year, you were harvesting a lot.
Yeah.
You had a good year, you were perfectly fine. Right. But that's one of those instances where if they would have taken the steps, right, which is before we went down all this road anyways, but in hindsight, right, if you would have taken those steps and said, all right, we know that in these given conditions, this fishery can't produce what we think it can. It really produces less.
So we put the buffer.
You would buffer it down to say, we're going to do this, and it might forego yield, but it'll keep consistency and won't crash the stock.
Right.
That's the kind of decisions happen at the management level.
Damn, that's a lot. That's a lot to deal with. There's a lot of factors, a lot of moving variables. And the thing is like a lot of this data that you get is in the past, right? Like I'm sure, well, yeah, exactly. And then I'm sure, like you're saying, you monitor things like this was, what'd you say, off of Argentina? Like you're monitoring, weather patterns, El Nino, stuff like that, salinity of the water, maybe numerous factors that might get you closer to real time, right? But a lot of your catch assessments, that's all in the past.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Usually we're operating 3 years behind.
Right. Yeah, that's tough to
with
do.
the age structured assessments.
That's tough to do.
So that's where we got to with ACLs. And let's say we're going down that road. So for commercial fisheries, right, ACLs seem to be pretty apt. You've got most of the time mandatory reporting. You've got a good account of what removals are. You know what's going on within the fishery itself. Now, the issue we've had, especially over the last 20 years, is the increase in participation in the recreational sector.
Right.
So we've had an increase in participation, which is not a bad thing, right? We're having more people participate, more access, more opportunity. But that has led, especially in the Gulf and the South Atlantic, especially for us at least, where you have a large portion of removals that are being taken from the recreational sector, right? The recreational sector is going out and they're harvesting these fish. And we've talked at this table 3 or 4 times, 3 times at least, about some of the issues with recreational catch, the direction we're going with MS krill, all that stuff. It's survey based. You're only getting a portion of the population. The federal survey, MRIP, has a lot of large scale fluctuation, has a magnitude issue with inconsistency issues. All that leads you to, you're supposed to harvest to a number, but how can we get to that number
if we don't have the right
if the tool that we're using to calculate the number
is all
over the
jacked
place?
up?
Right. It leads to the negative feedback loop that we've seen in so many stocks so far. Red snapper is one, right? We saw the plummet all the way through 16. We're seeing the same thing with amberjack. We just saw it with gag grouper over in Florida, right? You see this response where as soon as you start ratcheting down on a stock and saying the ACL is going to be decreased, the management response has to be, we're going to shorten the season. Shorten the season messes up the data that you're getting. Messing up the data causes there to be more uncertainty in the estimate. The estimate goes over, and then
chasing our tail,
right?
Yeah.
So it's just a negative feedback loop that just falls straight down the toilet.
Right.
So what's the solution?
There.
So
how do we?
This is what I've been flirting with for a little bit, and these are my ideas, right?
Trevor's got the answers.
Yes.
So it's not even on the sheet; it's in my head.
Even better.
Yeah, he didn't want anybody to get it. He didn't want anybody to release those details too.
So
can't let this paper get out. It's confidential.
There's a line in the requirements of Magnuson that establish fisheries management plans, and part of those fisheries management plans have to be annual catch limits, just like we talked about with that reauthorization. Annual catch limits have to be there. But through my time, at least in my short tenure, there's plenty of people that have been doing this longer than I have. There seems to be, in my mind, a suite of variables, a suite of diagnostics that you can use to determine whether a stock is performing well or whether things are going south, right? Those variables are more real time than what it takes to produce a stock assessment quickly. There's also a lot of species there that have undergone a fair amount of harvest for the last 3 decades and are still ticking. That just really just seem to roll. Vermilion snapper is a very good one. Vermilion snapper mature at 150 millimeters, which is about that big. Tiny. Head boats have been hitting them for decades. Commercial guys have been hitting them. The recreational fleet's been hitting them. Steady.
Still going.
Right? Still going. Yet we assign resources to assess them within a given time period. Mangrove snapper are another one. Mangrove snapper exists all the way throughout the system, all the way in the estuary, all the way out to offshore. Everything seems to be going fine with them. They're notoriously hard to catch, right? They're commercially in relative terms, they're unexploited. And they're underexploited by really anybody because they're so hard to catch, especially offshore. So that's one of those where, potentially we can think about resources not being given to an assessment to keep our finger on the pulse. We can use these metrics. Now, the metrics in my head that I've got, let's just talk about red snapper, for instance. Catch per angler is number one, right? That's harvest success. That is the amount that each individual is catching when they're going out there. That ranges anywhere from 0 to 2.
Right.
If you're keeping a steady catch per angler, that means there's enough fish out there to harvest and they're not shutting down. But then we have the question of what about hyperstability or anything else that may happen?
What you mentioned earlier with the cod.
Right. So the other side of that is an index of abundance, which is fishery independent. Right. If you have stability in your fishery independent index of abundance, right? We're doing the reef fish camera stuff right now.
Yeah.
That's giving us a baseline of everything that's out there.
That's the AI stuff. that you're counting?
Well, we're not quite AI yet.
Okay.
We're human.
I
humanized.
Didn't we talk about there was AI that was counting
yes.
the? Yeah.
So that's the other one, right? And so those two would give you essentially, if you've got a stable index of abundance over time, you know that the overall relative abundance shouldn't be trending down. It might be trending up. But if it's level, then you can assume that maybe no harm's being done.
Right.
So if you've got a pretty good catch per angler and you've got an index of abundance, you're doing pretty well. Now, what about the actual performance of the long-term fishery over time on the recreational side or any other side? Well, you can also monitor the average weight or the age comps of the fishery over time as well, right? If they're getting progressively smaller throughout time, detrimentally so, you could be recruitment overfishing where you're actually fishing the fish down faster than you can replace them or whatever else. To me, those three metrics, those suite of metrics can give you a real time, because they're right there in front of you, right? You basically, the index of abundance is the hardest thing to work up because you've got so much information going into it. The other two you're gathering from surveys. Right. You're gathering from what you're observing from the fishery directly. Those three give you a very good idea of what's going on in the fishery and how it's been performing year by year and even within the year overall. To me, that's the solution. Now, it's going to call, like, in order to do that, you have to put in alternative management measures into here, which is a large-scale feat because this is federal legislation. But to me, that's the direction I'm more trending in, is that there's a simpler way to solve this problem. And the annual catch limit assignment, I think in majority recreational fisheries, has done more to handicap or hurt the fishery than it has to bolster access or opportunity. I'm not saying that this is a bad thing, right? The federal legislation is not a bad thing.
Right.
It brought us to where we were, right? So we were at,
it's better than what we had.
Cod has collapsed.
Right.
And we're in a bad spot. Right. To we've brought these stocks back up, right? Red snapper was down. It got overfished. Now it's picking back up. So it's all positive steps. And I think at this point, it's time to take a step back as far as the strict regulatory assignment of ACLs and figure out a way to continue providing consistent opportunity and access while monitoring the fishery in a different way.
Become more efficient is what I'm hearing you say. Would that be fair?
Sure.
Okay.
And is that leading back to the ROLPD and the creel count and all that stuff that we're talking about?
All that stuff aids in it, right?
Yeah.
So if you're getting more surveys, you're interacting with the fishery more, you're getting a more sense of what they're producing and everything else, and you'll know two of these metrics right off the bat. And that's really, I mean, the assessment is extra steps, right? But there's no reason why you can't establish these harvest control rules of thresholds within these things, right? So if you drop below this, right? If your average weight drops below here, your CPU remains stable, but your index is decreasing. You can hit a trigger where, all right, we need to gather up all the data and do an assessment to ensure that we're still on the right trajectory. This is more putting a lot of these species on cruise control.
The way we're doing it now.
What I've proposed.
Oh, right. Okay.
You put a lot of these species on cruise control. No large scale management fluctuations, anything else like that. And these fish are able to operate with consistency, which is what the fishery needs. The fishery needs consistency over time so we can evaluate whether whatever management measures you apply to it, the stock actually responds to. Amberjack is notorious for this, right? Changes in quota, changes in ACL, changes in season, changes in elite limit, changes in bag limit. We stack them all up, and the stock never responds. And usually we don't give it time to respond over that time period. So I think there's some opportunity here.
The amount of time it's going to take to respond is going to vary by species as well, right? Because of breeding and how long it takes to mature.
Longevity, maturity, yes.
Each species
got rid of a bunch of habits, a bunch of AJ habitat as well out in the Gulf.
Yeah.
The rigs are you talking about?
Yeah. That's where they live. They're reef donkeys for a reason. You know, they like structure. We get rid of those. That's half their habitat.
Yeah. So what this new idea or what you just kind of pitched to us there, how do you kick that up to your superiors? Like, how does that work?
Gulf Council or
Gulf Council hears that.
I mean, I've talked about it with my folks and everything else. So we've flirted around the idea, but really it takes a larger audience or a larger group to consider that this is a applicable path forward and maybe a trial period or some flexibility, right? Because I didn't mention in here, one of the things that was passed in recent years was the Modern Fish Act. I'm not sure if y'all remember all the stuff that came out on it.
No.
It was Modernizing Recreational Fisheries Act. So essentially it was, everything I just talked about, providing more, more flexibility, adaptive ways of management, all that kind of stuff. All that was in the Modern Fish Act passed by Congress.
Mm-hmm.
The one thing it didn't change was the ACL requirement that's in the act. So it literally went the entire direction of these things need to be looked into, better ways of collecting data need to be looked into, adaptive management, flexible management, all that stuff needs to be prioritized, but it didn't alleviate the ACL burden, which is on all these fisheries. And that's still the law of the land across the board. You have to have an ACL for every single federally managed species. I think without the ACL requirement and substituting things that can serve as proxies or at least show that they work as well in concept as an ACL, to me, that
we're still handcuffed.
Yeah, that meets what the Modern Fish Act wanted to do.
Right.
But also gives us that opportunity in the future to experiment.
Is that something that has to be done legislatively at the federal level? Or
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah.
So this isn't something that you could just
snap my fingers now.
No, I didn't even mean that. But I'm just saying, like, is this something that the DMR could do at the state waters level and just say, we're going to implement this for state waters and we're going to conduct it this way? Because it sounds, well, it's no, because you.
Yeah, so it's federally managed species.
Yeah, it would have to go across the board.
So some of this stuff is already in practice, in theory, within the state itself, right? So I presented to the commission meeting on spotted sea trout, everything else like that, because of the issues with the recreational data, the time series, and everything else like that. We've been operating under index-based management for the last little while, right? Essentially monitoring the relative index of spotted sea trout to see if it's increasing, decreasing, how it's responding, and then basically observing presence, absence of recruits in the back and everything else like that to make sure that the fishery is on a positive trajectory. Based on what I'm seeing this year, that seems to be a positive thing. Okay. Spotted sea trout fishery is doing quite well in the state.
I can tell you there's abundance of 14-inch speckled trout.
Well, yeah.
I can tell you that
they know.
They know.
They know.
I mean, we caught 25 the other day, and every one of them was a cookie cutter.
14.
14.
Yeah.
14.
They stop eating when they get there.
What But they're out there. There's a ton of them. They're close.
Yeah. We did have a question come in again from Sibo. He said, how do we reduce discards? That's what he wants to know.
Yeah, that's always tough.
Yeah, so that's the one where, we've always had, to me, disparate seasons across the Gulf of Mexico in a lot of these species. And so when you're out fishing for a given species, not red snapper, there is 0% probability that you're not going to catch one, right? You are absolutely going to catch a snapper when you're not fishing, when you're fishing for another species.
Oh, gotcha.
That's what's out there, right?
Yeah, they're everywhere.
Right.
So to me, as a fisheries manager, I think on the recreational side, I think we would do a lot better on discards if we had some of these species overlap a little bit more. Because to me, it would push people out a little bit further to be able to target these different species. And they wouldn't be quite fishing as long, in my mind.
Well, it used to be like that. You used to be able to go out and get your amberjack, your snapper. You can make a whole boat, the run that you used to make. Now it's like snapper, amberjack, it's all broke down in the season.
And that's the most pragmatic way, I'll say. Okay. As if you do that. To me, the other end is all the work that's been doing with the descender devices and everything else.
That's what I was.
Yeah.
So that stuff is there, but we also had the Return 'em Right program, which is operated over by Gulf States.
We had them on during the boat show.
Yeah.
So Steve Zettelmeyer, who recently retired from over in Alabama, but did a lot of foundational work on red snapper and everything else, essentially showed that one of the most effective ways to reduce mortality on reef fish is quick handling, getting the fish off the hook and back in the water as fast as possible. And that shocked him, right? Which that's where we've always leaned because we have a shallow water fishery, as it stands anyways. But, Steve was shocked, and he's not a man who I feel like would be shocked very often. He's been in the game for decades at this point doing it. So it seemed like there's some positive effects to be gained there. But, the real part of it is there is always going to be discards if people are out there on the water fishing across these disparate seasons. That's always going to happen.
And I think what SIBO probably is meaning the same thing we're talking about. If I go out there and it's me and Jared, we have 4 fish to catch, and I pull a 16-inch snapper out there, it's my first fish. What am I going to do with it? I'm going to take it off. I'm going to throw it back. You know what I'm saying? Like, I'm going to go back for the bigger one. I'm not going to keep the 16-inch spout, and all of a sudden it goes back. If it doesn't make it, a dolphin smashes it or a shark eats it, you know.
Yeah, and those dolphins seem to be they're on 1 and 2. They're waiting for people to pull up.
Yeah.
100%.
I mean, outside of the practical application of discards, there's also the potential for a decrease with the alternative way that they're being estimated, right? So right now, discards are a fundamental aspect of the large effort that's being applied to the fishery through the survey and everything else, right? That's the scalar. So if you have a huge amount of effort that's being assigned to the fishery, and then a lot of that is being allocated to these trips with discards, you could be leading to a realm where you're overestimating discards. Now, I'm not downplaying the potential that there are a lot of discards, right? There is discards in the recreational fishery. But the numbers that are coming out, just like the recreational harvest numbers, also have that uncertainty with them. And to a degree, the discard estimates have more uncertainty assigned to them because it's essentially a report of what someone's telling you. And looking at that data and knowing what people are reporting, it's really a Christmas tree if you plot it out of intervals of 5 from 5 up to 300, depending on who you're getting. And we like to make the side joke that it's correlated with the number of beers that are consumed. On
and I guess it stays in the circle of life too. They're not getting taken from it. It still stays.
Yeah,
something's
nobody
gonna eat it.
You want to reduce dead discards as much as you can. Right. That's just foregone yield that you don't want to have happen in fishery. And there's been a lot of arguments about this one across the board.
Oh, I bet.
And there's a lot of solutions and everything else. And there's actually a new project that got funded by Gulf states with some of the money that was targeted toward it to essentially do the discard thing in a different fashion, right? Handing out cards before anglers go out. You'll see that one come online, if not this coming year, the next year, where each state is going to try to participate and do it to try to basically get more accurate estimates of discards coming from anglers rather than what we're getting now, to try to solve essentially what's going on with the fishery.
Yeah.
A discard, is any fish returned, or does it have to die? Does that matter? How does that work?
A discard, so you got regulatory discards, which they're releasing because fish are undersized or whatever else.
Yep.
You got dead discards, right? So that's a fish that is returned that is dead.
Mm-hmm.
That one is a little bit worse than everything else. And then just the general discards is something you throw back. So
okay. Let me ask you this question on legality. Is it illegal or unethical or both if you catch a legal snapper, throw it in the box, it dies, then you catch a bigger one, throw the dead one back overboard and keep the bigger one, and do that until it definitely seems unethical. You're not very ethical as a sportsman.
I would say unethical. I can't point to a regulation in my head at the moment that would be written against.
Right. And this is not word,
frowned upon.
Not legal.
Frowned upon.
Advice here.
Most everything is possession based.
Okay.
What you've got on that person, what you've got in your cooler, what you've got on the boat.
Right.
So unethical, yes. I don't know if I can point to a regulation that was
wondering there.
What about? I mean, we saw where we switched to circle hooks to get rid of the J hooks, get rid of most gut snapper. The deflators or the fin tools, are those still? You still got to have those on the boat?
Yep.
Yeah.
So they have to be rigged and ready for use. They're not required to be used.
Right.
I said in our state, for our fishermen, if they're listening, if they see this, right, our priority is that those fish get back in the water as soon as possible. A quick release and limited handling does the most for that fish as far as going back down. Now, if you get into deeper water and you start pushing out beyond 100 out to 150, that descender device and that venting tool is probably going to help you out a little bit more than it will when you're
okay. So am I hearing you right? 50 foot of water, we're not worried so much about venting them as we are just get them back.
You want to get them back. You don't want to put them in your hands.
Right.
Don't bring them in the boat and let them flop all over the place. Try to have a de-hooking tool. Right. As soon as they get up,
send them back down.
right back down.
Okay. And I don't know if we talked about it on here, if I read this somewhere or whatever, but like you just mentioned it, touching the fish, you remove that slime barrier.
Yeah.
I've heard it's like a sunburn for a fish because it allows the water to get closer or touch actually their scales.
Yeah.
Is that?
Yeah, it kind of
removes
that protective layer
right.
on the fish, especially if you got dry hands. Now, if you got wet hands, you touch the fish, not as much impact. Dry hands on a fish,
right? You're
really
just pulling that mucus layer,
especially
off
like speckled trout and stuff like that, who doesn't have the scales. It really gets them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So get them back in the water. That's what I'm hearing.
Yeah.
That was from Dr. Zettelmeyer, which is about as good as authority as you can have at this point.
Okay.
That's what we got.
All right. Josh threw a comment earlier. I flashed on the screen, but I didn't read it until just now. He said, overlap the seasons, return them right, and open shark seasons.
Yes.
All right. So the shark thing is a decent subject to bring up, right? Because it's come up so much in the last little while. Mississippi's shark limits are probably, pretty well up there as far as the ability to go out and take large coastals and small
relaxed.
Coastals.
Is that what I'm hearing?
Yeah. The commercial fishery that mainly existed, to my knowledge, pre-Lent, mainly in the spring, I think in South Louisiana. So when it opened up, they were able to catch their black tips and everything else, ship them. And I think their main path was down to Mexico. Through federal regulations and state-based regulations that govern the shipping and the removal of fins and the separation of fins from the tubes during times of shipping, it's really brought that fishery to a little bit of a standstill because the money was in the fins and then the tubes were very low profit. So they were basically stacking whatever they could to ship all in one. And I think it was on the way to Texas passed regulations where if you're going to ship the sharks, the fins still have to be attached. Basically, everything still has to be there, which kind of killed that commercial shark aspect. There's still a guy running out of Alabama that's doing it pretty regularly on the shark side.
Yeah,
we tried to open
he's
up
catching a bunch
of sharks.
Yeah,
we had a
rec or commercial.
He's commercial.
Okay,
it's federally permitted.
Okay.
We have a commercial shark permit that we put out. We try to establish a little bit of a commercial shark fishery. It just never took off. I mean, the market for it's just not.
The demand for the product itself is not as high locally or nationally.
Really.
Okay.
Yeah. And I think that was one of those ones you brought up where we kind of stepped too far in the protective wise, and now all of a sudden they're everywhere. You know, can't get rid of them.
The blacktip population, which was the main one, is doing quite well in Mexico. And the depletion estimates and all that are always cited to you. I mean, those are more, not just global when it comes to the pelagic sharks and some of the large coastals, but it's not really what we're observing in the Gulf of Mexico. The Gulf of Mexico shark fisheries are doing quite well and available for harvest. It's just that the regulations that have been put on because of the stigma associated with sharks and shark conservation have really, I think, handicapped that fishery a little bit in its ability to harvest and ship.
Are we the only one that levels that out? I mean, they don't have very many enemies in the Gulf of Mexico, right? Sharks.
Oh, he means predatory wild.
Yeah. So about humans are the only, only ones that do anything about
each other. I mean, they'll take out each other. But
Right. There's so many.
Do we have them ranked in flavor?
Well, I can tell you the number one right off the bat. It's Mako.
Yeah, that's what I've heard.
1,000%. And there was a moratorium on them, right? Or you couldn't have any of them in the Gulf, but I think that's since been lifted.
I remember it coming out a while back where they were saying no more short fin Makos or something like that.
Yeah.
I think Thresher's up there.
Okay.
Thresher's a popular one. And then locally, like black tips.
They taste good.
Yeah.
Okay.
Just got to know how to prep them.
Right.
You know what I'm saying?
Right.
Bleed them out.
Yeah.
I mean, good is a relative term.
Correct.
They're edible.
Correct.
It's like Nutri-Rats.
They were bad.
They were good.
It's all about the chef. Like
right.
I've seen people say, "Oh yeah, if you take these ladyfish and scrape the meat and toss it in panko with green onions, it tastes great."
It's a lot of work.
Yeah. Or I could just fry this thing.
Right. I could just cut this damn white trout up because he tastes great too.
Yeah, he's
I'm a big fan of mullet. That's pretty easy to deal with too. So.
That was good.
Yeah, that was good. What is there anything else you had in your book there that we needed to touch on? I mean, you make good points. I mean, to me, it's like anything else that's scientific. It's how real time is our data, how accurate is it, and then how can we implement said data into whatever procedures, regulations, assessment tools that we have or can develop to keep the population at its healthiest.
Yep.
That we can balance fish population from recreational guys, commercial people making money and the market doing okay, and I can buy it at a restaurant, and the recreational guys like us can still have fun and enjoy the fishery.
Yeah.
And it's easier said than done.
Yeah, the fishery is the fish and the people. You try to balance out the resource to be able to make sure that we're you know, using it optimally.
Because we have examples of just going ham on it, and we know where
it never works.
We know where that goes.
Well, I think my first episode here, I was like, we know the red snapper season shouldn't be 3 days.
Right.
But we also know it shouldn't be 365 days.
Right. Because it'll just be
So there's a sweet spot there.
Right.
And we think we're on the short end of it. We think it should be a little bit longer.
Yeah.
And I think we'll be in good shape.
Okay.
Getting to that is
baby steps.
A lot.
Now, you already said it, I think, but I don't remember what you said. When are we going to get the next updated number of how much snapper has already been caught? When is that? How do y'all do that?
The break.
Yeah.
June 6th.
Yeah.
So
July
after
6th.
after the season ends, then you reassess the number.
Yep.
Okay.
Well, they do it halfway. They do July 6th. They reassess it. Then they put the last whatever.
Right. That's what I'm saying. Well, you could reassess and say no. There is no more second season.
If we're at 82, 342, we'll see.
Yeah. Y'all stop catching them all. I ain't even been yet.
Yeah. Really. That's a shame. Got to be honest on the show. Always got to be honest on the show.
Yeah.
They seem to be moving into their summertime pattern though. They're starting to slow down a little bit. It's getting hot out there. So
yeah, a little harder to catch.
And them big bruisers are used to seeing those pogies drop down. So
they got a headache.
Yeah, they know what's happening.
Something about that way that fish moved. All of my buddies died when they ate that one. So I'm gonna hold up.
Dudes that dropped 6-8 ounce egg sinkers on my head. Like I get it. I'm not gonna bite it. Yeah, I'm not gonna bite it.
I ain't eating it.
Yeah,
I'm hungry. I ain't eating it. Could you imagine if there was a human version of that?
Yeah,
I guess there is for certain things like smoking, cancer, and shit like that. I guess we have our own things we have to not do. But anyway, Clarence asked one before we wrap things up. He said, "Has speckled trout stock? How's it looking?" Is what he's saying.
Yeah, it's looking relatively well. I'm fully expecting once we get done with this year with the index and all that, I think we'll be seeing a pretty good increase. It showed stability over the last little while. It showed, in general, we've had optimal conditions in the fishery for the last 3 years in terms of rainfall during the summertime.
No bonnie carry.
It seems like we've had,
real
good recruitment. We've had available habitat for recruitment all the way through the west and everything else because of the high salinity and low rainfall. And everything I'm hearing from the fishery and observing, it's going.
It's hot.
It's going real well.
Okay.
So we'll see. And hopefully we continue to have stable conditions through the next little while and be able to evaluate how this species might act long term, right? In the next 3 years. Because it's since I've been around, I don't remember a 6-year span where we haven't had some sort of disaster.
But I mean,
perturbation, whatever else.
Those years you're referring to, I mean, there was a lot of weird shit that happened. Lots of kind of outlier stuff.
Fisheries in a tough spot. The regulatory changes were made. 2017 was one we keep talking about. That one keeps coming up in conversations. 2017 was record rainfall in the month of June. Pushed all those fish out to the islands. You could walk from boat to boat at each ship during that time period. So we had a lot of harvest, a lot of rainfall. Then you had 18 was a regular year a little bit, and then 19 was record rain or bonnie carry. 20 rainfall, 21 record rainfall. And so it wasn't until 22, 23, 24. Now that we've had the conditions for a fishery.
And then what was it? Was it 20? Was COVID, which pushed everybody out onto the water to fish and hang out and do everything too. So there was that variable.
So 3 years of optimal conditions, and this is what the fishery is producing at the moment, which I think is a fantastic sign as far as the resiliency goes.
Hell yeah.
Even after the Snowmageddon?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Cranking on right back up, huh? Snowmageddon couldn't even stop him.
No.
I still haven't gotten that one on my head though. I'm intent on doing some work out there. Just really keep some eyes on spotted sea trout and just see their large scale, small scale movements. I think that'll be a really good project for us to undertake and give us some insight as far as the stock and how it moves around.
Hopefully we can get them snooks in here too. We can get some snook running around. It'd be a whole lot better.
Someone sent me I think it was Marcus McDavid caught a tarpon.
He caught 3 of them. They caught 3 of them.
Yeah. So if those are still alive, right, that's the same general thermal regime as snook. So
Yeah.
Okay. So that
if they can survive, maybe other things.
Maybe
Gotcha.
they made it.
Josh, Sibo says thanks for the information. Lots of good information to you. Thank you.
Yep.
Josh threw this in a haymaker right at the end. I don't know if we can. This is not probably a wrap-up question, but he said, "Can we discuss Mississippi versus LA snapper limits?"
Oh, you're talking about the 4 fish per person, 2 fish per person, I imagine. So
that goes back to the overall
it does
allowable catch, right?
Yeah. So
per state.
Obviously there's always been the contention about, how much we get versus the other states. And first off, with the quota and ACLs and everything, when it was first divided out, we got, 3.55%. We were sitting at 137,949 pounds. Got an increase to 150, right? We thought we were in the sweet spot with 137. That was kind of where the fishery was operating. We were feeling good about it. We went up to 150 with the rebuilding plan, and then got hammered by calibrations just like Alabama did, which just put us into, we had that conversation here for a while. Like it just put us into a spot where we didn't need to be. It was over punitive for the relationship between the two surveys, what we were observing in our waters versus what was being produced on the federal survey, and just put us down to a level, to me, that just, and everybody else agrees, but like it just put us down to a level that just wasn't appropriate for our fishery. Right. We can harvest a little bit more than that and be okay. Now, we did argue for, a year. I gave presentations and, my staff did a bunch of work and everything else to fight back for, 82,000 where we are now. And what it comes down to is that if you increase the overall bag limit, you're likely going to shorten the season. That's
Correct.
how that kind of stuff plays out. Louisiana has had the same level of ACL, didn't undergo calibrations in a punitive manner. They basically, have been sitting where they've been sitting, and they've been harvesting less and less. So their fishery slowed down a little bit, which has allowed them to be able to make the decision to go to 4 per person. Our fishery just doesn't sit there at the moment. If we get more pounds, if we see that availability for us, that's something the director definitely has been talking about considering. I know he said it a few times, but where the fishery is now and what we have available to us now, that would shorten the season.
Yeah.
And lead to an overall negative impact. We're trying to still at least provide the Memorial Day to July 4th and that potential for Labor Day. That's what we always want to try to provide. So that's your sweet spot.
Yeah,
yes.
Yeah.
Okay. That's a good answer. That was a lot
you
of
ever think we're going to go back to the cold months? Because that's the October, November.
the prime months.
Yeah, that's the ones I want. You ever see that happening again?
It would take a substantial change. And I think it's a policy shift that would have to be recommended by anglers for the most part as far as distribution, right? Because, you don't necessarily want the fishery to roll from, Memorial Day all the way through nonstop, right? Mm-hmm. The fishery at some point is going to start decreasing, and it's not necessarily in, localized depletion, right? But it's that coupled with catchability. Those fish shut down. Mm-hmm. When it gets hot during this time of year, once they've been pelted a few times, those fish start to shut down. They start to slow down. And that's not optimal for the fishermen, right? You put them out there in the heat and they're not catching, they're catching 1 fish per person or whatever else, and they're really having to work for them. To me, that's that's almost a fishery level or an angler level discussion of, hey, we want to prioritize this. What would it take to get there? And then you provide the options of, well, this is what it would look like. Your season distribution will be here. You do this, and that's how you would, remain.
Let's trade August and September for October and November. I'll write that up right now. Let's do it right now.
And then Clarence threw out another one. He said, how about Friday, Saturday, and Sunday after Labor Day weekend? I guess for that second half, just doing the weekend.
That's what Louisiana did last year. Opened up just on the weekends.
And I think we talked about it before. Who do we have in here? Was it you last time? Maybe even talked about doing like youth.
Yeah. I wanted that one to come off last year. Just didn't quite work out. But that was one where we didn't have enough pounds to fully open it for the fishery. So we were considering maybe we can provide this opportunity to youth anglers, stuff like that. And it'd have been fairly novel. It hadn't been, something like that hadn't been pulled off. It's pulled off in the hunting realm a lot.
Youth weekends. Yeah.
It just didn't quite come together last year, so we weren't able to do it. But it's still in the back of my head.
Okay. Yeah.
Still got it up there.
I think it shows that y'all are trying to get creative and navigate within the the parameters that you're given, and protect the fisheries, like you said. How'd you say it? Where the person meets the fishery, and they can
the fishery
live in harmony.
Fish and the people. You can quote Matt Hill on that one.
Yeah. That's a good quote. But dude, we appreciate you stopping by, man. Thanks everybody for the questions in the comments below. Those we really enjoy. But you've always got the good info, man. You're well versed on the topic, and we're recreational guys too. Everybody wants to catch all the fish that they can, when they want, how they want. But we understand you have to, maintain the fisheries, right. And conservation is a real thing. And anytime you put the brakes on anything that you want to do, it comes at a cost, and it can aggravate people, but it's all part of it, right? I mean, that's what it takes.
And we like to try to maximize opportunity wherever we can, right? A lot of the concerns that the anglers have that they sometimes put towards our direction, I mean, we also share. We have the same viewpoints.
Yeah.
Right? It's just that, I mean, when you're talking about red snapper, you're talking about federal management. We're answering to them, right? Mm-hmm. We're trying to do our best to interact as well, taking the concerns from the anglers, public, everybody else, and doing our best to have that at the federal level as well. So
you'd love to give us 3 or 4, but that'd be less heat off of y'all.
Right.
But then we'd have to take it back when you shut the season down 2 weeks afterwards.
Right.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, Eric might be jumping through the roof. Only have to take calls for a couple of weeks.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Dude, once again, thank you for the info. Again, coming in here, getting in the hot seat, talking about it. We appreciate that. Everybody on the lives, watching the replays. If you don't have the Brownwater Banter app, go download it. It's free in the App Store and Google Play. You can see all of our episodes in there. The audio, the YouTube videos are in there. Our merch store is in there. We do a absolute terrible job of promoting our merchandise. I'll click this on the screen right before we wrap it up. If you got a cell phone, if you're watching this on TV and you can scan that QR code, we're actually out of that hat. We don't have that hat, but it'll take you to the shop and you can see what we do have left. We got some shirts, some hats in there, some Brownwater gear.
The app always has the tails and scales and a link to the ROLPD.
Recreational offshore landing permit. Roll. Okay, that's not easy to say at all. But anyway, it's all inside the app, so go check it out, man. We got some cool stuff coming up. We're going to try to bang out a few more in June. Our schedule's a little wonky, but y'all just stay tuned. We'll put some messages out. Do we have anybody?
Yeah, we got another DMR show next Monday or Tuesday.
Okay, and what's that going to be? That'll be June. What's the topic? Do you know, or who's coming from? Joey's talking around June 16th-ish, 17th.
Yeah, it is.
Michael and Matt.
Oh, man.
Aquaculture.
Yeah, I think that's what it is.
There you go. See, Trevor even knows that.
Yeah, he knows stuff before we know it.
All right, well, cool. Yeah, y'all keep tuning in. We'll keep doing them. And